Okay, everybody, thank you so very much for being with us today for this episode of the MirYam Institute webinar. We're very excited to have our guests with us, and I'll address myself to them in just a moment. But before I do, and before I introduce them in earnest, I want to express, as ever I do, my profound thanks to the co-founder of the MirYam Institute, Rosita Panini. Thank you, Rosita, for everything that you do on behalf of this organization and a great deal beyond that. And also I want to thank our colleague in common, the great and powerful Mr. Alan Langer, truly great, truly powerful, and with us here today. Thank you, Alan, for everything that you have done to facilitate this webinar. We are going to be talking today, ladies and gentlemen, about the Bennett-Biden relationship, the pitfalls and the pros, or the pros and the pitfalls. It's obviously a very important subject. And whether you're joining us by way of this live webinar, or by way of the podcast, or by way of a postcast, or indeed you're watching us on JBS, we thank each and every one of you for granting your time and your attention to a subject that certainly warrants that time and attention. And quite frankly, to delve into this subject, we could not have hoped for two more qualified, better qualified individuals. Both of whom have served the state and the people of Israel for decades, both of whom are intimately familiar with the foreign ministry, and both of whom well understand and have a deep understanding of the various machinations of the Israeli-American relationship. I'm going to interview them. It's not a debate. They're going to bounce around their responses between one another. They'll tell me where they think I'm right. They'll tell me where they think I'm wrong. And in the spirit of the MirYam Institute, we will arrive at an elevated conversation today. So to introduce, first of all, Ambassador Danny Ayalon. Danny Ayalon served as Israel's ambassador to the United States of America from July 2002 to November 2006, during which time relations between the two countries reached an all-time high. Strategic, political, and economic ties were deepened and expanded across the board. And Ambassador Ayalon played a leading role in securing the agreement for $10 billion in US grants and loan guarantees to Israel, the roadmap for peace, the historic exchange of letters between President Bush and PM Ariel Sharon, and the bilateral trade that reached $20 billion and another $10 billion in investment from 1997 to 2002. Prior to his appointment to the United States, Danny Ayalon served as foreign policy advisor to Prime Ministers Benjamin Netanyahu and Ehud Barak, and as chief foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. As a member of Israel's Foreign Service from 1989 to 1997, he represented Israel as a consul in Panama and as a member of the Israel's permanent mission to the United Nations. Prior to his governmental service, Danny Ayalon worked in the private sector as a senior financial executive, and we're honored to have him with us here today. Thank you so very much, Ambassador Ayalon. Danny Ayalon is joined by Ambassador Arthur Koll. Ambassador Koll, before I read his credentials to you, is also a great friend of the MirYam Institute from our inception, and is also something of a mentor of mine. Ambassador Arthur Koll is the former Deputy Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he concluded his service as the head of the Media and Public Affairs Division. He's a former ambassador of the State of Israel to the Republic of Serbia and Montenegro, and served as instructor of the National Defense College. Arthur Koll also served as consul of the Israeli consulate in Atlanta in the United States, and as Director of Projects for the Central Europe and Eurasia Division. He earned his BA from Hebrew University of Jerusalem, an MA in Political Science from the University of Haifa with a distinction, and Ambassador Koll is a former instructor at the Israel National Defense College. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you agree we could not have two better qualified individuals to interview today. Welcome to you, Ambassador Ayalon. Welcome, Ambassador Koll. And first question, may I call you both by your first names for the purposes of this interview?
Please do.
Wonderful. Well, we're very, very pleased to be here we're very pleased to be able to talk about this important subject. Now, I know that there will naturally be an overlap with the various topics that I'd like to cover with you today, but I've broken those topics broadly into the categories of Iran, bipartisan support for the state of Israel, internal coalition competition, which is something we might get to at the end, but I'm going to put that as a lower priority within the Israeli government, and also the role of the foreign ministry within the relationship between Prime Minister Bennett and President Joe Biden. So I'd like to start with this question outright, and it focuses on the subject of Iran. But before I ask it, let me give a little bit of context. I have very long believed that the idea of seeking to mobilize American Jewry and pro-Israel lobbying groups on matters of global as opposed to regional or local policy pertaining to the United States administration is a misguided and even damaging policy. I don't believe in the potency of a policy that encourages thousands of individuals to applaud in sealed rooms against a given policy of an American president. And my reason for that is not because I believe it's wrong to seek to gain the approval of the Jewish community in the United States, but because I believe it's ineffective. Now, distinct from that policy, for example, is my view that Netanyahu's speech to the US Congress was right and was appropriate and effective. Feel free to disagree with me, of course. But ultimately, that too was unsuccessful on the issue of the Iran deal. So with all of that having been said, we are back to discussing the Iran deal, the potential re-entry of the United States into some sort of an accord. My question is this: will a Prime Minister Bennett emulate the megaphone approach of his predecessor, Prime Minister Netanyahu, or will he prefer the sealed room discussions employed by former PM Olmert? And for our audience's information, when Israel discovered the construction of a Syrian nuclear reactor in 2007, Prime Minister Olmert visited with then President George W. Bush to determine whether or not the US would carry out the strike against the reactor. When President Bush refused to do so and encouraged a diplomatic resolution, Olmert launched what came to be known as Operation Outside the Box. He detonated the reactor, he neutralized the threat, and all of that took place without any acrimony between an Israeli Prime Minister and an American president. Which approach is likely to be the one taken by Prime Minister Bennett, and which is the right approach? And Arthur, I'm going to start with you, and then Danny, you can reply.
Thank you very much. First of all, I just want to make a comment about the speech that you referred to. I think actually that Netanyahu's speech at the Congress on the issue of Iran was wrong, was ineffective, and was damaging. It was ineffective, clearly, because the agreement was signed, and it was damaging in the long run because we still suffer from the consequences of a choice that Prime Minister Netanyahu made long time ago and consistently followed it, and that is to prefer the Republican ties rather than being bipartisan. And I think that on that regard, there is a lot of fixing damage done in front of us. And I think that in part answered your question. I strongly believe that silent dialogue without any damaging statements which create confrontation is what we need. That definitely on such sensitive issues. I truly believe that Bennett will enjoy a warm welcome by the Biden administration, first and foremost because he's not Benjamin Netanyahu, and there is a desire to see a new beginning in the relationship between the presidency and Israel, between the Democratic Party and Israel, and he will be given the chance. And the way the Israeli government, Prime Minister Bennett, Foreign Minister Lapid, and others conduct themselves will show the way. And the way to take is silent dialogue, creating trust, renewed trust, and building on the trust on every sensitive issue.
Danny, what are your thoughts on that? If you could share your perspective on Netanyahu's speech in the Congress, and then tell us whether you agree with Arthur's assessment of how Bennett is likely to approach this, and also the readiness of a Biden administration to accept a Naftali Bennett. You know, I remember reading about Menachem Begin and the idea that this right of center prime minister would be absolutely ostracized from the political landscape in America. It turned out not to be true. Could we see a repeat of that outcome with the Prime Minister Bennett?
Yes, well, first of all, Anthony, thank you again for the invitation. And I applaud very much you, Rosita, and Ellen for this great work, continued and ongoing, very good and important work of the MirYam Institute. So may you continue to grow from strength to strength, and Yishar Koach.
Thank you.
I agree with everything Arthur said. Let me just add one personal facet here, which really goes down to the characters and maybe personalities of the two presidents, especially with Bennett. I believe Bennett will go for the behind doors approach and not the megaphone diplomacy on two accounts. The first one is because he is not Bibi Netanyahu. He doesn't yet have the gravitas of Bibi Netanyahu. He is not very well known as a political leader in the world, not even in the United States. So he doesn't have any intimate knowledge or personal contacts with Congress and many of the American leaders. So I believe he will be much more comfortable to do it again in a very, very low-keyed manner. Secondly, just as Arthur said, the approach, the megaphone approach or Bibi Netanyahu approach proved to be ineffective, unfortunately. And if we are brutally honest, we see where we are today. Today, Iran is closer to the bomb than ever before. So we know that, first of all, his approach back in 2015 did not help. And also, we are now at a junction where we know that as they are now enriching up to 60% grade uranium, where they are toughening their position vis-a-vis the United States, we have to have a very, very quick response. And the response should be devised in cooperation and coordination, collaboration with Israel. And this can only be done if a real trust is being established between Jerusalem and Washington. And this is why I believe that Bennett, and I'm sure he will be invited very soon to Washington, actually the one Israeli personality that will precede him is our president, our outgoing president, Rivlin, who was, again, in a very, very, I would say, extraordinary manner, was invited as a farewell, I would say, gesture by Biden. He was invited to see him. So I believe he will pave the way for the next visit of probably next month of Naftali Bennett. Rivlin himself is also ascribes to the policy of keeping a low key, but being very forceful in the behind the doors negotiation. So I believe this will be the case. Now, there's another aspect here, which is a personal aspect of what would be the relations or the relationship between the two leaders, namely Biden and Bennett. As a general rule, you know, Benjamin, that it almost is not very important, you know, who runs the White House or who runs the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem. When it comes to the relationship, Israel and the United States are natural allies. The interests will not change. The character of the relationship will not change. However, personal chemistry, as we say, is also very important, and lack thereof can be damaging and certainly sending the wrong signals to foes and friends alike in the region and beyond. I would like to invoke, and this will be my last words about this question, Benjamin, the relationship between President Clinton and Yitzhak Rabin, but in reverse. Clinton was a young, upcoming president. Rabin was a veteran general and a veteran Israeli leader. He was the 2 times Minister of Defense and Chief of Staff and Prime Minister before. And Clinton looked up to him almost as a father figure. And the bond between them, notwithstanding the age difference and the personality difference, was amazing. And I believe this could be the same here, but in the reverse, where now the American president is the older statesman, Bennett is upcoming, the young one, and if he will be able to give Biden the respect and will look at him in a way and trust him, I think Biden may like him very much. I know Naftali Bennett, and I know he could be very, he is actually a people's person, and he could strike very, very good relationship. Biden, of course, with his experience and age, I believe we'll see Bennett as someone that he can trust, as someone that he can chaperone, and that should not compromise Israel's interest, but quite the contrary.
Well, thank you very much, and that's a great insight, Danny. I want to turn back to you, Arthur, about somebody who has been dispatched to the United States, and of course that's the IDF Chief of Staff, Aviv Kochavi. He was dispatched for meetings with his counterparts, and in January of this year, Kochavi stated that, and I'm quoting, "A return to the nuclear deal from 2015 or even a similar deal with a few improvements is bad and wrong. It is wrong operationally and strategically. Operationally, because it would again allow at its end or before the Iranians to enrich uranium, develop centrifuges and a weapons capability, taking them up to breakthrough to a nuclear weapon." Now, my question for you is this. Given the complexities of navigating this new relationship between Bennett and Biden, is the dispatch of Kochavi a message from Bennett to Biden that the Iran deal is one of security in nature exclusively, and therefore is it a wise dispatch to have commanded? Or has Kochavi, as some critics are saying, though not many, has Kochavi, by being sent, ended up being unwittingly politicized? We saw, for example, Arthur, similar allegations of the politicization of defense officials surrounding Yossi Cohen, former head of the Mossad. What are your thoughts on Kochavi's visit to the United States, and how does that help or hinder the Biden-Bennett relationship?
First of all, let me say, Benjamin, that in my view, and I think I'm not the only one who thinks so, Kochavi's open statement regarding the Iran deal at the time was wrong. This was not a statement that should have been taken by a chief of staff, creating some kind of unnecessary tension vis-a-vis the United States, because it had this diplomatic objective. But that it was under a different Israeli government, so let's put it in that context. Regarding the last visit, no, I don't think that there is any problem, and it should not be linked to personal relationships and to the status of leaders of the security echelon with the Israeli political elite. I think at this specific time, the newly elected prime minister felt necessary that the chief of staff with his assistants would go and quietly share all the concerns, all the information and all the concerns that Israel has before the Iran deal is signed, when there is still time to have an effect on the outcoming result. And it is necessary to try and have an impact on those talks. And it is necessary that our concerns be taken into consideration. And in that context, I see the trip of Kochavi and his talks in Washington.
Danny, if you don't have a divergent opinion from Arthur's on that, I'd like to pitch the next question to you first, if I may. Would you like to come back to anything Arthur mentioned before I move on?
Well, only one thing is that, well, the fact that actually the red carpet was rolled for General Kochavi signifies that his statement was not taken in a personal way and certainly was not marring the relationship. I also think that the signal, as you mentioned, Benjamin, that he is the first senior Israeli to visit under the new government, is also to emphasize the Israel to the extent of it being an existential threat with all the implications. And this is why it was, I think, was very timely. And I hope also that it is successful as well.
Thank you. So just before I ask this question of you, Danny, I want to set the stage for our audience. First of all, Ambassador Ayalon is somebody who is associated with the right of center, and Ambassador Koll is somebody who I associate with the left of center or center left. Please, both of you, feel free to redefine yourselves in your responses, but I view those disparities of opinions as part of what makes the work of this institute so very enjoyable and so very enlightening. We can have individuals as skilled as yourselves coalesce around a given subject and give of your insights. So do feel free to correct me if my description doesn't find favor in your eyes. But I mentioned
if I may say, Benjamin, if I may say, as you could see on critical issues, there is no left, right, center. There is care for the country.
That's right. And I will also say, if I may be self-indulgent for a moment, that's something that I've very much learned from you, Arthur, in our conversations over the years. Right from when Rosita and I first walked into the foreign ministry, you were still in situ as the Deputy Director General, and you took us directly to that point, if you remember. So thank you very much for that. I want to turn now to the issue of Judea and Samaria. So Prime Minister Bennett has always been very forthright about his opinions on the legitimate presence of the Jewish people in Judea and Samaria. And indeed, further construction there has just been approved and announced, including in Mishor Adumim and Karnei Shomron and elsewhere. Now, Bennett was very supportive of the mooted application of sovereignty by the previous government. It was an idea that was ultimately shelved in deference to the Abraham Accords. President Biden has clashed in the past with Prime Minister Netanyahu over communities in East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. And he was vice president when Resolution 2334 was adopted, in part due to the abstention of the Obama administration in November 2016. So, Danny Ayalon first, how does a PM Bennett adhere to his ideological standards and principles while forging a connection with President Biden?
Well, the short answer, Benjamin, is that it may and probably will be a bone of contention. And the secret of the two administrations is to go to the golden rule of no surprise by each side, and also by agreeing to disagree, and not to let any disagreement on these issues, which is not part of the bilateral relationship, to spill over to the relationship. It has always been the case. Under Obama, there was a little bit of aberration of that, but I would say that short of President Trump, all American administrations since 1967, whether Republicans or Democrats, had the same position, and all of them had disagreements with Israeli governments, both from the right and left in Israel. You know, Benjamin, that actually the entire project, if I may, of the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria started by no other than Shimon Peres under Rabin's government, which means the Labor Party. And during Ehud Barak, when he was prime minister, there was more construction done than under some months or years of even Bibi Netanyahu. So here, I think a lot will depend on the trust. If there's a mutual trust and appreciation and mutual respect between the two leaders, this can really bode well for this issue as well. And this is why the first visit of the prime minister in Washington will be critical. In this visit, usually, well, in every visit prime minister in Washington, there is always a time. Could be half an hour, or it could be extended to an hour or more, dedicated to private meeting, one-on-one between the prime minister and the president, where they can size up each other first, especially when they never met before, but also where they can really spill the beans, so to speak, where they can really be very, I would say, honest and transparent and go all the way down if indeed they want to. And I think this is very important to do that. So each side knows exactly the thinking of the other side, the considerations, including political considerations of the other side. And this is how they can even agree on a path or a roadmap of the relationship. So there is no doubt that Biden will not be any different than all other administrations, closer to maybe Obama than even Clinton or Bush. I'm talking about Bush 43, George W. But the issue can be circumvented if they come to agreements in the beginning, where they look into real politics and not into grandstanding or any kind of grandstanding rhetorical speeches. You see, Bennett at this point has to establish his legitimacy, and here in Israel, and also his, I would say, authority and the leadership abroad as well. He knows that he presides over a government which is split ideologically, so he is pretty much, his hands are tied when it comes to controversial issues like what to do with the settlements, even the two-state solutions. But here practicality comes to mind. First of all, there is no partner on the other side. And I think Biden and his administration knows it very well. So there is no point in getting into a clash and talking about what should be the final statement, agreement or settlement, if it's only theoretical and far, far down the road. Let the Palestinians have their elections first. Let them sort out their own house, the real rift, war, I would say, not just a regular conflict between Hamas and Fatah. And only then we can really talk about some concrete issues to move ahead. In Israel, as I mentioned, paralysis in the government, in the political system when it comes to the territories. So nothing is going to really move in a major way. So here I think they can come into some tacit and quiet understandings, what can be done, what cannot be done. If I were to advise to Bennett, I would say you can come to an agreement where in the major Jewish blocks we can build, as long as it doesn't encroach on, let's say, Area C or Palestinian, let's say, designated territory. But otherwise, it's really not judicious, not by Israel and not by the Americans, to come down and look at every brick, as Obama was doing to Bibi Netanyahu back in 2009. And if this is the case, really this whole issue of settlements or the whole Palestinian conflict issue can be put, I wouldn't say to rest, but can be put in the sideline and wait to other priorities, first and foremost, Iran, but not only Iran.
So, Arthur, I'm going to ask you to come back on that, but before I do, I'm actually going to roll into the next question, because it's a subject that you've written for us about. I know is extremely close to your heart. I imagine it's equally close to the heart of Danny. But I would like you to come back on Danny's response after I've posed this question. Among other things, I'd like you to weigh in on whether or not we can afford to leave the Israel-Palestinian issue on the sidelines, as Danny just spoke about, especially given the operation that just took place a couple of weeks ago. Can we really afford to turn away from it? But let me ask you this question first. American Jewry, Arthur, as you know, overwhelmingly votes Democrat. They also overwhelmingly support the two-state solution. Now, to inject my own point of view here, both of you know well that I'm personally wholly opposed to the two-state solution as commonly understood, but we are in the era of a democratic administration. They're very likely to endorse the policy of the two-state solution, though unlikely, as Danny said, to do so urgently or with force. How can a Prime Minister Bennett, Arthur, square the circle of maintaining a maximalist approach to territorial claims while avoiding the trap of creating an adversarial relationship with the US president, and by extension of that, significant swaths, potentially, of American Jewry as well?
First of all, I agree once again with what Danny said, and I just want to add a few other things and definitely touch the important issue of the relationship between Israel and the vast majority of American Jewry. I think what we have to take into consideration a few basic truths before we try to analyze. And number one is, when it comes to the United States, it seems that the Biden administration is changing priorities and is shifting certainly some attention from the Middle East to the Far East. And the Biden administration in that regard wants to see a stable Middle East as possible without surprises, without clashes, without policy surprises, and that includes Israel and the Palestinians, of course. Now, of course, the reality sometimes is different, as it was a few weeks ago in the latest round with Hamas in Gaza. That is number one, the Biden priority. The number two is Bennett has a very complicated government to govern. It's you know, had you asked me a year ago if such a government would ever be created, I would think that you should be looked into some, you know, what did you take last night? But you know, this is reality. This government serves a purpose, and it is clear that amongst its objectives is not to make dramatic decisions on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. It cannot, by the very fact that it is comprised by the way it is. So I don't, as Bennett himself said, this is not a government that is going to either annex or withdraw from the territories. That is not on the agenda. But there is, I think, one important decision that Bennett will have to make, and this government will have to make, I hope they will, and that is to change the balance between the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas. Because the Palestinian Authority, not only that it is weak, but it has been weakened by our actions as well. And on the other hand, the Hamas, not only that it has gained strength, but it seems that at times, more than times, the way Israel acted to preserve the Hamas in Gaza and to allow it to gain strength and to gain hold more and more on the population was something that that we see from the results. and it is not paying. It is coming back at us time and again. And I think it would be right for the Bennett government to move back to some kind of improved dialogue with the Palestinian Authority. And that would be a bonus, in my view, also in the relationship with Biden, because for the American administration, it is important to see an improved relationship with the Palestinian Authority. And if Bennett wants to achieve that, it would be right to listen to these desires by the American administration. Regarding the American Jewish community, there is so much damage done in the last few years, or more than last few years, in the relationship between Israel and the liberal Jewish community in the United States, that there is also a lot of fixing to do. You know, just as a reminder, I think a week or two ago, Ron Dermer, who was the former ambassador in Washington, said that the relationship of Israel with the evangelical community is more important than with the Jewish community. Now, it is important to maintain excellent relations with the evangelical community as well, but let's not forget the Zionist ideal and the raison d'etre of the state of Israel, which is the state of the Jewish people. And I think that this statement by Ron Dermer, who was so close to Netanyahu so many years, also reflected the way Netanyahu thought and acted. So there is a lot of fixing to do. And it is not only with regard to our policy vis-a-vis the Palestinians or the two-state solutions. There is a whole list of issues that need to be addressed by our government, new government, like the arrangement at the Western Wall, like Giyur, like
conversions,
like conversion, and just to send a signal of warmth and welcome, which was absent for some time now. And I'm glad to see that the minister that was picked to lead the Israeli relationship with the diaspora Jewry, Nachman Shai, you know him very well, and of course Danny as well. He is very familiar with the issue. He's a minister, but he enjoys also the skills of a diplomat, and he served as a diplomat. And I'm sure that he will make every effort to reach out to the liberal Jewish community and to reignite the warmth and the desire and the excitement that about Israel that we are so much in need.
And we're very, very pleased at the Institute to have Minister of Diaspora Affairs Nachman Shai as a continuing friend of ours, Arthur. He's actually going to be interviewing for us about his priorities, not just the priorities, but indeed his imperatives as he views them in terms of his outreach to diaspora communities. So everybody can look forward to that interview. I want to turn to another issue now to give our audience just a little bit of information. We ran this webinar until quarter after the hour, so this will finish at 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. I've just got 3 questions that I want to run through, but audience, if there are things you want to ask, please put them in the chat box or raise your hand, and we will try and come to you if time permits. And I'll also try and interweave those within my own questions. So for my last 3 questions, and in fact, Arthur, what you've said has actually invoked a new question in my mind, which if time permits, I'll throw in there. But both of you are highly, highly experienced diplomats. You're both intimately familiar with the responsibilities of the foreign ministry. Now, the baton for that ministry has been passed from someone that I believe, it's only my belief, but I believe to have been shown to be highly ineffective and ill-suited to the role of foreign minister. I'm referring to former Chief of Staff Gabi Ashkenazi, to someone who I believe very much has the potential to be highly effective in that role. And that, of course, is Foreign Minister Yair Lapid. Now, is the presence, the amiability, the affability, and the dedication of Yair Lapid to the mending of fences between Israel and the Democratic Party, as well as his more secular leanings, the panacea to any difficulties that Naftali Bennett may face in the area of relationship building with the Biden administration? In other words, is he the right face, the right place, the right individual to offset some of the reservations that a Biden administration may have about a Prime Minister Bennett? And Danny, before you answer this first, a little bit more context to that. He's just approved the placement and posts of 36 representatives of the State of Israel abroad. And I believe that has to be a step in the right direction in terms of disseminating Israel's perspective effectively and in unison to the American Jewish community and the American non-Jewish community. So Danny, do you agree? Do you think PM Bennett will allow Foreign Minister Lapid to steer the foreign ministry in accordance with his vision for that ministry? Or will he seek to impede the work of the foreign ministry, as we saw Prime Minister Netanyahu do, according to most accounts?
Well, Benjamin, there is a big difference between the foreign ministry under Netanyahu or under ministers who were under Netanyahu and where it is now under Lapid, simply because Lapid is almost on par, and certainly in political power is on par with Bennett. So he can really throw his weight and demand authorities to come back. And we already saw it with the coalition agreement. Just before the government was sworn in, the ministry received back the authority over fighting BDS, and also of basically getting back authority vis-a-vis the United States and the other powers, and certainly Europe. So this is something which is given. And also on a personality level, I believe that Yair Lapid has a potential to become very effective foreign minister, not only because he gets the budgets and because he gets the nominations and all other all kinds of other means that the ministry needs, but also because he is a communicator, former, a media superstar. As a communicator, he can be very, very effective in public diplomacy and also on a one-on-one. When it comes to the Jewish community, and mainly in the United States, our brothers and the sisters there probably will feel very comfortable with Yair Lapid. But just one word of caution. I just hope that just as the pendulum under Netanyahu was going all the way maybe to the ultra-Orthodox and evangelists, I hope that now the pendulum will stay right in the middle, and that establishing trust and great relationship with liberal Jews, Reform, and other walks of the American society, which is very important, the Hispanics and many others, and of course the Afro-Americans. I hope this will not be on account of the Orthodox and on account of the evangelical community.
Yeah, that's a very, very important point. And actually, Arthur, again, I do want to give you the opportunity to supplement Danny's response, because I know through our conversations offline just how important it was to, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say, to almost rebuild the foreign ministry in a post-Netanyahu era. But before you do speak to that, I want also to put in front of you a subject for you to tackle, which is the bipartisan support for the State of Israel, which is something that traditionally has been pursued almost as though it's a holy grail by successive prime ministers on the left and of the right. Foreign Minister Lapid has been in contact already with Speaker Pelosi, which seems to have been or seems to have resulted in a positive, though unremarkable, call based on the reports. But he did say this last week. He said that, quote, the management of the relationship with the Democratic Party in the United States was careless and dangerous. The Republicans are important to us. Their friendship is important to us, but not only the friendship of the Republican Party. We find ourselves with the Democratic White House, Senate, and House, and they are angry. We need to change the way we work with them. So, Arthur, in the context of Danny's response and your own thoughts, of course, how will he change the way Israel works with the Democrats? And where are the lines of common cause between Bennett and Lapid in that pursuit? What can Bennett and Lapid coalesce around when it comes to outreach to the Democratic side of the aisle?
First of all, Benjamin, I don't think it is in the hands of Lapid only. True, he is the foreign minister, but there is a prime minister, and it is the duty of both of them to work hand in hand in creating a shared idea of how they would like to pursue the strengthening of the relationship between Israel and the democratic echelon from president down, which I couldn't have said, of course, it better than Lapid when he described the need to rebuild those relationships and the damage done earlier to them. It is Netanyahu has not Netanyahu. I'm still, you see, after 12 years of using the word Netanyahu, when I think of a prime minister, I'll have to get used to Bennett. Prime Minister Bennett will have to instill energy and thinking, because he is the prime minister, and the relationship between Israel and the closest and strongest ally was always in the hands of the prime minister and his office. True, and we know that Lapid is now the foreign minister, and he is going to be a strong foreign minister because he is the key partner and actually the creator and the co-prime minister in this new structure in Israel. And so he is a very strong foreign minister, but it is in the hands of both of them. Regarding the pendulum, one of the small books which I enjoyed reading again and again when I was in high school was a book written by Maimonides. And Maimonides wrote about how one gets to the medium. He was always preaching for moderation, and he gave a formula regarding how to heal someone who is extreme, obesity or behavior and so on. And he said that in order to come to the right place in the middle, sometimes you need to go a little bit to the other side, so the pendulum in the end ends up in the right place. I don't know what is how it is done in international relations, but I do know that as it was critical for Israel to maintain a bipartisan relationship when Netanyahu was prime minister, it is so important to maintain that policy of not preferential attitude, neither to the Democrats nor to the Republicans, to maintain and strengthen, nourish those relationships today, also with the Republicans and not only with the Democrats.
Danny, let me ask you a question just to throw the cat among the pigeons here. Are we chasing fool's gold by pursuing bipartisan support in the United States? There were a lot of very critical, unrestrained representatives from the Democratic Party during Operation Protectors of the Wall, and it's not seeming to abate that criticism. Is this tenet of bipartisan support and our pursuit of it the equivalent to chasing nothing but an apparition or an idea that belongs to the past?
Well, first of all, the bipartisan support is critical. It has always been critical, and it will continue to be critical. And it's very important to maintain and support, and even to strengthen. But Benjamin, you touched a very, very important point, and this is that there are two sides to the coin, or that you need two for tango. And no doubt that the new Israeli government will go out of its way to reestablish good relations with the Democrats. And in that respect, of course, the Democratic Jewish community, which will be a very, very important element here, also will be a strong basis also to bring the Democrats back on Israel's side. But this is something that I hope did not go too far. I mean, we know the squads, or the gang of four, the gang of five. You know, there are a few. I don't want to mention names here, but there are a few members of Congress which I would say are, if not only anti-Zionist and anti-Israeli, I would say, in many respects, also anti-Semitic, and it's they are very vitriolic in their relations, in their response to Israeli gestures, and also are very have been and continue to be very critical of Israel in a way that we have not seen before by any stretch of the imagination. I didn't think that somebody from the American Congress, including members of the Foreign Relations or Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, would suggest cutting aid to Israel, or talking about almost isolating Israel. This is something which is very, very, very dangerous. And here we need, it's not our job to do it, it is squarely lies on the shoulders of our brothers and sisters, the Jewish democratic community in the United States. They are the ones who should, and I'm afraid to say, they went too far. I don't think that they can be brought back into the fold, but at least they should be isolated themselves so that the Democratic Party can regain, I would say, its soul, its tradition, and also its common sense of understanding Israel's, again, natural alliance with the United States, with the same code of ethics and values and everything that goes with it. And here, when we heard all this criticism by the squad and some others, what was missing in my mind was some kind of correction by the mainstream Democrats. And the mainstream Democrats should rise up to this task, and certainly they should use now the leverage of having a new government in Israel to open a new page in the relationship and going back to this, I would say, a fabulous past in relations between Democrats and the state of Israel.
Thank you very much, Danny. Let me ask another. I'm just going to ask two questions. I know I said I had three, but I'm going to add a question quickly. We've spoken about how the relationship can be built. Arthur, the ideas of what Bennett can do and Lapid's usefulness and utility there, and indeed guidance and counsel. What can detonate the relationship, Arthur, in your view, between a Bennett and a Biden?
I don't want to think in such terms. I hope nothing will detonate, because the relationship that will be built will be such that are based on trust, on not surprising each other, on the ground, on policy changes, and by mutual consultation, and definitely by giving thought and taking into consideration the interests and the concerns of the other side. And once we manage to do that and continue to build on what has been sometimes forgotten, and that is that the relationship between Israel and the United States lie not only on interest, but also on shared ideals and shared vision of how we should live on this earth. And we should remind each other again about those shared values. Then I don't think that we will see any detonation or explosion in those relations. But of course, the foundation has to be strong and strengthened for that.
So my last question, and then I'm going to ask Yoram to come in shortly and ask his question. My last question for this section of the interview is the following. I want to talk about something you both alluded to earlier, which is the role of Israeli presidents. It's important here. President Rivlin, as you said, is working with Naftali Bennett and with Minister Lapid to coordinate the message he will relay during his upcoming visit to the United States. Incoming President Herzog certainly has the measure of the American political landscape, in my view. And I know that the presidency in Israel is not a political appointment per se by any stretch, but I do feel that deploying these two individuals and maximizing the potency of their stature, of their respective stature, is going to prove invaluable to a Biden-Bennett relationship. Now, I say that because the relationship between Rivlin, Israel's president now, and Prime Minister Netanyahu was at least at times very adversarial. Couldn't quite work together for various reasons. But now we see a coordination of the message, as I said, between Bennett, Lapid, and Rivlin. And we also see somebody with real bona fides with regards to the American landscape in Herzog, the incoming president. Is that a potent tool in the relationship building here, not only between Biden and Bennett, but also between the state of Israel and its friends in the United States, whether Jewish or of other faiths? And Danny Ayalon, if you can come in on that first, and then Arthur, I'd love to get your perspectives as well.
Sure. Okay, so Benjamin, although it's well known that the role of the president in Israel is mainly ceremonial, but he can be quite effective in helping Israel's interests, both domestically, when he can really heal some rifts, in and among the population, and also when it comes to Israel's standing in the world, and especially when it comes to relations with critical Israeli allies, first and foremost the United States. One model, if I may say so, of such a president that was very effective was Shimon Peres. Mm-hmm. And it's not a secret that Benjamin Netanyahu actually was banking on Shimon Peres to really deliver messages in a way that would ameliorate relationship either with Obama or with Arab countries, whether it was with Egypt or with Jordan, and in many other areas where Israel did not even at the time have formal relations with. I believe that Herzog would be the typecast of Shimon Peres, first of all, because of his vast experience and knowledge of foreign policy. He is very well respected. He's been around the block for a long time. He knows very well the Jewish community, especially in the United States, by virtue of his last role as the chairman of the Jewish agency. And I have no doubt that he will be a great asset for the government, for Naftali Bennett, and for Israel when it comes to, hopefully it will not, but when it comes to kind of bring any tensions down between potential tensions between Israeli government and the American administration.
Arthur, what do you think? Do you agree that or am I placing false hope in the influence that these presidents can have here?
I don't think that we should exaggerate the influence, but I fully agree that a president like President Herzog, like President Peres before that, in the past, can play and will play, in the case of President Herzog, an important role in strengthening and assisting the government in strengthening Israel's position and dialogue worldwide. But as far as I know, he is almost number one priority, if not number one priority, and that is also because of his position that he has he's leaving, which is head of the Jewish Agency, and he is fully familiar not only with the challenges of the different Jewish communities worldwide, but also the concerns, and also the subject that we talked about earlier, the rift between Israel and the liberal Jewish community, mainly in the United States, and he made it a priority to do his best and promote a renewed approach and understanding, and hopefully also create some forums, forums and discussions under his leadership that will facilitate such a fixing and a renewed relationship. I think that President Herzog, who has, of course, a political background and also now as head of the Jewish Agency, by nature, he is a kind of a civil servant. And I say it as a compliment, coming from a civil servant myself, being, I truly believe it's a compliment in the sense that President Herzog will not surprise the prime minister by what he's doing, but work hand in hand and serve the best of his ability, and he has a lot of ability to serve the country from his position.
Thank you very much, Arthur. In the last 10 minutes, I want to ask Alan, could you bring in Yoram to ask his question? Yoram, as ever, you've got 15 seconds to ask your question, and Alan's going to unmute you now.
Thank you. Two quick questions. One is an apparent change or yielding by Israel to United States. One, vis-a-vis China by supporting anti-China votes. And two, agreeing, no surprises, with the US, which Netanyahu already criticized. The other question is about cracks in the coalition, that its fragility could be obvious. One, about unification of families with Palestinian families, and two, vis-a-vis the Tzolelot, the submarine between Gantz and Saar and Bennett.
Well, thank you very much, Yoram, for presenting questions easy to tackle in the remaining minutes that we have. I don't know who wants to take which aspects. I think I'll focus firstly on the China issue, if I may, because I think that is a very important issue. And then Arthur, maybe you can delve into the issue of the coalition wrangling, because I think that's something I wanted to talk about as well, but time didn't permit. Danny, tell us about this vote by the Israeli government in favor of a more adversarial approach with regards to China's dealing with the Uyghur minority there.
Yes, no doubt that China topic will loom large over the meetings, the first meeting between Bennett and Biden, and probably also in the meeting next week between President Rivlin and Biden. Here, Israel is between, I would say, a devil and the deep blue sea. It's very important for the Israeli economy to continue the momentum, commercial momentum with China, including investments. But on the other hand, we cannot compromise, of course, the United States interests, especially their security interests. And here, if I have to prioritize, certainly America comes first, even when it comes to hurting Israeli interests, when it comes to economic benefits. During my time in Washington, we had a big crisis with the Bush administration, George W. And this was over UAVs that Israel supplied to China. The issue was resolved at the end by drafting a memorandum of understanding between Israel and the United States, namely that Israel would run by the United States any shipments to China of either military or even dual use. It means components that are basically civil for civil or industrial issues, but also that could be used in the military. So anything which has an American, of course, imprint there, we have to get permission from the United States, and I think this kind of regulates the relations, and also this may protect Israel vis-a-vis hostile approach by China, because when we are committed by this memorandum of understanding, the Chinese understand that we cannot actually protrude or do something against it. But definitely the relations with China are not, let's say, used to the maximum of its potential. And especially now, when the United States is very sensitive, Israel has also become very sensitive when it comes to infrastructure projects here in Israel, with not selecting or barring some Chinese companies to participate, or at least not to win. We have not heard the Chinese, let's say, demarches or condemnations or remarks about it, but I'm sure it will be very well advised by the Israeli government, and this could be the role of Lapid, of the foreign minister, and not the prime minister, also to pay a visit to Beijing, of course, with full transparency with the United States, but also to explain to the Chinese what is the contour, what are the parameters of the relationship, without actually having an adversarial effect on them. I mean, China-Israeli bilateral relations.
Now, Arthur, we only have a few minutes, and the questioner raised about coalition wranglings and fallings out. He raised two issues. One is the family reunification law. That's one aspect of it. And the other one that he spoke about was the investigation into the submarine affair. I'd actually personally like you to tackle the latter, if you can, because I think that the disagreement over the former is largely expected. I think so, yeah. But feel free to take it in. But to give our audience context, there is now a little bit of acrimony between Minister of Justice Gideon Sa'ar and Minister of Defense Benny Gantz. Tell us about how that could not only affect the coalition, but also be a symbol of how difficult and fragile the coalition may prove to be on other topics as well.
Yeah, I actually, if you don't mind, prefer to talk about the general situation rather than deep into specific examples, because these specific examples are only two of many that will come, that will manifest differences of opinions and ideas and ideologies and approaches by the different parties that make this coalition. And we have to remember that this coalition was, in a way, not a natural birth. Was not born in natural birth, maybe a cesarean, but it was created with the purpose of, number one, to bring a change in the general discourse in the Israeli society, to create a change and move away from certain paralysis that we have witnessed within the Israeli political system, leading from one election to another and another, and we could have continued on and on probably endlessly, and that had to be put to a stop. And now that the government is in place, it will have to solve these two and other issues coming up. That will be the big test. And I think that if we pass successfully the coming few months, then that will and be able to pass the budget, which is a critical point, waiting for the government in the near future. Once a new budget is agreed upon and the government passes successfully this testing period of time, then it will have a good chance of taking us into some kind of stability and continuity into the next year and maybe beyond. If not, and if every single disagreement will come up and magnified by media and by politicians, then that might be a problem for the survival of the government.
Well, Arthur, thank you so very much. You brought us in right on time. I'm very grateful to you. There were other questioners. I apologize. We're not going to be able to get to their questions. It leaves me only on behalf of myself, the MirYam Institute, Rosita Panini, co-founder of the Institute, and Alan, our colleague in common, and of course, everybody who's listening either live or during the postcast podcast or on JBS, to say thank you to you. Thank you so very much for your insights, for your expertise, for continuing my personal education. And to you, Ambassador Koll, and to you, Ambassador Ayalon, I'm sure that you join me in wishing every possible success to the government of the State of Israel, because of course their success is the success of all of us. Thank you very much indeed, and I look forward to the next time that we meet. Thank you.
Thank you.